NIG. This is NIG Coach, and today we're going to talk about social alchemy for the NIG in particular. Now, there's already been a filming out about social alchemy as a general concept and principle, and you want to make sure you understand that, because now we're just going to kind of get into how it applies to the NIG and their particular groupings. One thing I will mention about social alchemy in general related to the NIG is that all mojos are enacting social alchemy, and it underpins all the goings-on of businesses and personal lives and everything else. However, so those should be run based on those principles. But for example, in a company, you may actually have best practices, which you could think of as like a metaphor for social alchemy. And these best practices for that kind of business, they may have a compliance officer. So in the company, the best practices are enacted in every way, but the majority or is not of the staff of that company would not be spent focusing necessarily on the compliance and the way that works. They would probably be spending more of their time enacting a given principle of those best practices in their department and enacting it very, very well. That's their job, is to enact that principle of the best practices very, very well and provide that for the overall company. But the, say, compliance department, the compliance officer, that's their focus. Their focus is on how that works and that the business is actually doing that and how other businesses are doing it and ways to make the best practices better. If you relate this to NIG, social alchemy is the best practices that humans should go with because there's a natural law to it. But NIG, with their configuration, they're kind of like natural law compliance officers, natural law code of conduct, pretty much. So social alchemy is important for all mojos to live their life by because those are best practices. But for NIG, being a kensei on those best practices and where they come from and where they're going, that's a special function that NIG often excel at for the tribe. For this reason, social alchemy best practices should be used by all people, but the study of it, the way it works and why and the relationships and a level of nuance that a lot of people don't need to know in order to run their lives according to best practices. But for NIG, that is part of the way they were designed to help as a specialist for the tribe, as a specialized hero, and therefore the study of social alchemy as a particular kensei skill set in your character sheet is an excellent way for NIG to turn on their abilities, very much like mojo reading. All humans should have the ability to see everyone in their personal life, their mojo, and the ability to actually get to the bottom of most people's mojos given enough time and resources. But then, of course, in the collective, there may be some people who specialize in mojo reading as being the ones to read the most difficult cases, the ones who spend their days, their hours actually focusing on reading. As in, they don't do it when needed, because a normal human would need to read mojo as new people came into their life. But a professional mojo reader would need to read pretty much for everything they're doing. Their entire career skill set would have that infused with it. NIG, mojo reading and social alchemy, the study of those disciplines, those natural law phenomenon, greatly increases your facility with your top powers, your momentum powers, and then of course going on to your whole peak pathway. We'll go with the recognition cell first. This is NIG, learn about other NIG. All mojos need this, but for NIG, because the way we work is so sometimes unusual and has such extreme variations, it's very, very helpful to understand what you are with a lot of context, because when you see that's how it could be played, you can actually have an opinion about that. But a lot of times, abductive reasoning, you don't really know to have an opinion about something yet. So, particularly for NIG, who we start with abductive reasoning, it's very helpful to have a lot of sophisticated samples with which to ping off of to increase your abductive reasoning powers. Because if it's possible that my mojo has that riff in it and me, you might get to speculate on a third, fourth, fifth riff. If you are aware of 1,000 riffs of Naiji, you can speculate on thousands more. So it's very, very helpful to know about your kind as constellating data points of what you are. So very important. As part of that, 2 words I like to hold on to is love and lore. Learning about your mojo, you learn the lore already, the ability to constellate more and to use your abductive reasoning and deductive reasoning to figure out what your mojo is capable of, what you are as a creature. But then also love, that the more you study Naiji and you become aware of them like from a mind's eye position or a third person perspective in a way, you can't help but be like, those are really awesome. Naiji are really cool. They can do such interesting things. It awakens a proper love of self, a love of the great gift you were given by Gaia. And the Naiji gifts, because they're so unusual and extreme and sensitive and such as we've discussed before, often you've had a lot of auto reactions, auto abilities come on in very strong ways in order to deal with your environment by the time, by the time you're like in your teens, you've taken an extremely complex, say like, alien ship, and you've turned a lot of knobs, you've pulled a lot of levers, you've moved around a lot of energy sources from their original places to augment things that are normally supposed to be considered auxiliary functions. Doing that makes it quite difficult as a case to figure out how you got from the seedling Naiji that you began as to what you are now. Because of how many turns we take and how fast and hard we take them. So studying other Naiji as you unwind their case, which is often easier sometimes to look at them than to yourself, it'll help you realize, oh, and often not unlike a teaching story, where if you go with some lessons that are so high, so vast, so great, so complex, so personal, so impactful in their implications, then it can be hard to hold that truth, to see that truth at all. But a teaching story carries you along and you are following the character and you are seeing the character as not you, but of course you're seeing it as you. It's impossible to see a story and not project how you would agree with what the character did or you would disagree with what the character did. So that relationship is happening. So it allows the teaching story the higher lessons to get through when a direct sort of, traditional lesson wouldn't go through. Watching other Naiji, you're seeing this story unfold that's not you, but it's super relevant to you. And it allows a combination of super relevancy while being able to slip past sensitivity barriers that you might normally have up. Next we have the Nijez. Nijai are awesome. They're just fucking amazing. They are what gets us going. It's why we do what we do. And this brings up 2 other keywords I'd hold on to in relation to Nijez, which is sacred and scoring. The sacred is, as Naiji, especially since we are actually directive, we want to perform well. We want recognition that we have done well. So there can be a morphing to try to be like other mojos. The Nijai other, that teaches us what is important, and thus if you're winning or losing, in peak pathway terms that mean the most. So the Nijai tells you what is going to be the most rewarding thing for you to go after in life and what is the most valuable to your heroic storyline. And this will often be against what the world may say is relevant at a given place and time. Naiji normally just natively go against this, but having the Nijai with you greatly increases the independence of mind, because Naiji serve their higher spirits, and that's what keeps them self-possessed against improper attachments with the world. So what's even better than detachment, in a way, is I detach from the world. The world keeps trying to pull you back to attach. Detach. pull you, detach. That works, and Nige, you're very strong this way. But what's even stronger is I detach, pulls me. I detach and I hold. I hold to my other. When you have that, you're good to go. There's nothing the world's gonna do that's gonna shake you. Not when you have your own, I've seen natural law and my other has fallen in love with it, and so I must honor it above all else. Honoring it above all else. This brings in the concept of scoring, of what you want to do with your life, with your existence, with your soul. Getting the approval of your other is the way it takes you to your Fumasta. So for us with the Nijai, their irreverence, their sense of empathy towards underdogs, Naiji are born to help with that, but the world can kind of jump on Naiji and they can start moving, you know, start morphing, start shape-shifting and whatnot, and they become very aware of like, ooh, I have really good survivalistic abilities. Like, kind of like they identify with that part of themselves, and that's important. The Naiji are supposed to have such incredible survival abilities because they're supposed to protect their HSP, not let it be hemmed in by the world. And continuing on to where they are able to protect, to find, to advocate for a Nijai, which is not easy. Advocating for a Naiji is not easy because of the way we work with the SS index, relation to means, and so forth. But the Nijai also not easy, but it's what we're supposed to be doing. And that's what we're supposed to be training our incredible energies on, is making a world, because that's what Naiji want to do. They want to build worlds. What kind of world? A world that the Nijai would like. It needs to be a world that is in line with natural law and can be accomplished by heroes. That's the Naiji end. But how do you know when it was successful? When the Nijai show up and go, this is my home. When Nijai come to what you built and call it their home, you have made a sublime world. And this proper scoring, again, increases even more, and now we're going from Nai all the way down to Vi, Z and Vi. This increases the independence of mind that was already started with the Nai. It's now gone all the way down the peak pathway, which is, I know what I'm doing, I've seen natural law truth, my other approves of me, and everything I do to walk the one way of truth, I'm getting claps. Claps from a goddess fairy. Nothing that the world's gonna do means shit compared to that. Like, the reason why I do what I do with Pod Lair and the way that I do it is because my other wants me to. I don't care what the world wants. The world would have told me to stop or to sell out long ago, and I'm going to do neither one. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep going the way my other thinks will lead me to being a Fumasta. That's what she wants from me. I'm her companion. And so, the greater her companion, the greater she is. She wants me to be Fumasta, because then she is the consort of a Fumasta, a Naiji Fumasta. I want that for her. To do that, I have to do certain things. Again, independence of mind. And not just sort of like, grim. No, grand, great, epic, artistic, spiritual, like visionary, huge, epic, game-changing, world-changing for a better place, a better world, a better game, a better everything. This makes you sensitive. You're gonna take a lot of hits doing this, but you'll take them because taking hits to get a Nijai, god or goddess, whatever it is to you, what would make that creature most pleased, most honored? I do it gladly, I do it with pride. It makes doing the challenging things seem like, what else would I want to be doing with my life except that? And the world's not going to teach a Naiji, so not the way it is now. And just in general, it's been more difficult to teach Naiji even when there's temples, or it's a Pod Lair world, because our powers are more intangible. But obviously having the temples is what we need, because when you're studying things that are subtle like that, and subtle and different, you actually need a lot of samples to cross-contextualize, because that cross-contextualization, that entire algorithm, that's the answer. There is no smaller way. Next up, Nai Alpha. This brings in our good friend the Nai Z. Very, very impressive, badass. And they help teach us a crucial lesson as Naiji, which is, what is Nai? Because of its position at the top of the SS index, that's a major issue, and it's a major issue because it's our source power. Our source power is a power that you can spend a lot of time just asking, what is it, before you figure out how to turn it on and then what to do with it, which, by the way, are also very complicated questions for Naiji. What is it, how do you turn it on, and then what do you do with it? So when it comes to very subtle, sophisticated thing, this is a theme, and it's very important. Social alchemy is really just this theme over and over again in different ways, is you need counterpoint in order to get it. So for example, if you are a Westerner and you go over to the eastern part of this planet and you meet cultures that are very different than one you're native to, you will encounter things that are principles and concepts that when they hit you, you're going to have, one of three reactions, which is, oh, that is how in the West we do this. That is, we don't have a direct correlate to how that exists over here, but I think the closest correlate would probably be this. That would be our closest correlate to that concept or principle. We don't have a correlate, even one you could sort of wiggle a little bit. We don't have a correlate that really fits well. We will need to create that, discover that, invent a version of that in our language, because we didn't really know that concept or principle existed, and thus there was no opinion on it. We have no opinion. We don't really even know how to define it, but often you can define things as, for example, comparing different animals in the jungle. Trying to describe accurately an animal in every way, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of chance of missing sort of the fine tacitness. So it's easier if you know lots of animals. And if you know lots of animals and you're talking to another person who knows lots of animals, you can kind of just tell them it's sort of like such and such, except they have an external thingy. But their bottom half is kind of like such and such, but with this. And that's how high-level people in just about all fields actually discuss cases, because it's the most sophisticated way of doing it. So with Nai, that's very, very helpful. With the Nai-Z, you can kind of see how they do things, and then you're like, I wouldn't have done it like that. It. What is it? Naiing something. It's figuring out what it is. For example, this happens when you're doing the recognition with Naiji, except Naiji often have a rather artistic way of expressing the experience of the Nai simulator. And even the Zide Up ones, because they're still G, it's convoluted. So it's very interesting to see Nai-Z approach cases. And when they do, you can really kind of compare Nai with the G compound to the Nai with the Z compound. And by compare and contrast, you can kind of mind's eye this third thing, which is Nai. Nai with a discernment tandem. That concept. Because when you understand that concept, you as a Naiji, you're in that concept. You and the Nai-Z, your cousin's in this concept together. So you must know your cousin in the concept to know the concept that informs on you. For us, that's Nai-Z. Next up is Ji. This is the Durams. This is the Ji-Nai that helps to teach us this. As a Naiji, we are Ji-Mojo, but as mentioned in other filmings, having Nai with Ji and having Nai over Ji makes for a very kind of conceptual Ji, a sort of romantic code of conduct, and this can cause Naiji to sometimes dismiss their Ji-ness, and that's because they don't know how to interface it and sometimes other Naiji maybe can't help as much. They need to be like stimulated more. So kind of like a metaphor that just jumped in my head right now is imagine you're like, you know, an elf dude or elf dudette, and you're walking around. Often Naiji imagine themselves as alien races that come to humans, or as a human that goes to other places where they're alien because they're human, or mix them up. Actually, the Martian Manifesto teaching story that my spirits like to teach me through, that has all those elements thrown there matched up, because it's a nice way of learning. So let's say you're an elf. We don't have elves in my Martian Manifesto story, but we do have aliens that are rather elf-esque. So anyway, imagine you're an elf and you're checking out these humans. And in there's this cool, cocky human. Male, female, doesn't matter, but it's a Genii. They got a swagger to them. Now, they're a bit out there, but this is key. You like them. Genii are likable to Naiji. They're a near relation, so I do like that, and this is critical. I don't agree, well, it's not a question of agreeing. I operate differently than a Genii does. But I do agree with a lot of the ways they approach situations, rituals. So let's say that the cocky human gets into some sort of altercation with a not so spiffy, you know, Lich Lord or something, making it up. So Lich Lord, being kind of a jerk, is messing with the cocky human. Now the cocky human is pushing the issue, the code of conduct ritual issue. They're pushing the issue. And if this had been you, just on your own, you probably would have just walked by and not even paid as much attention, because ghost walking is a primary movement methodology for Naiji when they're out in the world. So that energy efficiency is important because we are subjective. But that energy efficiency can lead us to not acting when it's time for our code of conduct to cause us to act. The Genii can stimulate that. They can get into counters with Lich Lords that maybe they shouldn't, because the Lich Lord has abilities that are difficult for the Genii to deal with. But it's an adventure that is relevant to you as a Naiji. You have skills that work well here, and it tells you that this is actually an adventure module that you could and should get involved in. And just like, you know, with the Naiji, you have to watch out for not going too chilly when you learn about Nai and its totalness. With Genii, you have to watch out for not overstimulating yourself, overexerting yourself with so much, you know, outward activity. But it is really good to kind of ramp up that romantic bardic code of conduct that you have, so that when you are going more in your native shamanic kind of style, you don't lose touch with it. So it's important to kind of go on like sessions with Naiji, go on sessions with Genii. Even if it's not ones in like real life, it can be through media, through your simulator. It's important to do that so you can find those elements, because as a Naiji, you're very good at slipping things and shifting into things, which is awesome, but that means you have to have a really good idea of what you are and what you are about. Next, Nez Alpha. The Nez Alpha, Naiji, Nijai, and Nizai. I think the best thing to really work on this is I would study comedy, because the Nez Alpha are so heavily represented in comedy. Other mojas are there as well, but the Nez Alpha are the most represented by far. That's a really good way to learn the language of the Nez channel. The Nez channel operates in a pattern jumping sort of way, and humor, that is the basis of humor. It is jumping on patterns, it is moving things around in interesting and clever ways, giving multiple meanings, giving vague meanings, all with which to delight oneself with. One thing that getting into the Nez Alpha really helps Naiji with is Naiji can sometimes overly focus on trying to be dominant or trying to be controlled. Those often are very important in Naiji, and they are important. but they must also accept the nature of being a lead interpretive. They must accept that they use a pattern-based power. And that's actually going to make you your most powerful, your most rewarded, is to move your mind that way. Naiji, who don't like to remodel, often they don't do a lot with humor, or if they do, it tends to be rather crude, vicious, repetitive, tedious kind of humor. Naiji, who have high level abilities, they tend to actually have the ability of wit. If not like a stand-up comedy, wit. They can actually jump patterns, they can recognize patterns being thrown back and forth, which just ups their ability at anything they want to do, whether it be debating, art, understanding spiritual concepts. That really helps. It helps to have a sense of humor when looking at nature. If you want to see the patterns in nature, I can't explain it other than it just does. It really helps, expands one's mind. Because humor helps connect things that seem like they wouldn't be connected. So natural law doesn't have any paradoxes, but can seem like it. So in order to connect those paradoxes into a synergistic whole, the mind that has wit and humor is very able to do that. And all mojos obviously have an interpretive power, but as a Naiji, interpretive power is first. So that's the kind of game playing you'd want to do a lot with. This starts actually with the Nijai. The Nijai is irreverent, they're playful, but they tend to have an emotional sensitivity with them because of having the Jai that keeps things in a safer area for the Naiji. It's wild and irreverent because of the Ni and the Jai, but it is values based and it does care about about the Naiji. Let's say for example, not that Nizai don't, but having the Zai as their second power, it combines the irreverence of Ni combined with a tactical use of humor. This helps expands the Naiji mind of exactly what humor gives, what kind of tools it gives. Because with Nai Alpha, there's a lot of humor they share, natural law humor. It's about the absurdity of perceived paradoxes, both in humans and in systems. That's funny. It's fucked up, but it's funny. Right then, that's Nai Alpha humor writ large. That's fucked up, but it's funny. Or it's funny because it's fucked up. Or you know what, I'm going to laugh at that because it's so fucked up, I really don't know what else to do except laugh. So, Nai Alpha got to share that bond. The Nijez, there is playful banter. It often comes in, that's both Nai Alpha and Ni Alpha. But with the Nijez, it's a banter that is more relationship oriented. Where the Nizai, the banter goes into other areas, and it kind of teaches the Naiji, once that third Nez Alpha is brought in, the fourth one, third besides us, the fourth total, it gives you an idea of what humor can do, what areas it can go into, and you can use all those tricks yourself and try to approximate them with your Naiji powers, and even ones that you can't approximate, just knowing they exist, and the humor has that as part of the way of wit. It's very important to study the way of wit to be an Naiji. And Nez Alpha, if you study Nez Alpha, you are studying a large section of the way of wit. Then we have the Romantics, which includes Nijai and Jinai, I've had them already, but also the Jaini. The Romantics, this is very important for the Naiji because of the Romantics, they can tend to detach from things in general. They have detachment as a top power. So they can detach from their own way if they're not careful. Being around other Romantics helps educate a Naiji on the fact that they are romantic and are fed by romantic powers. This will help keep a Naiji, for example, from overdoing the Zai. Whereas the Naizi will help a Naiji not have weak Zai. There are some Naiji that go that route. They just like, I don't do that at all. You see it more in environments that aren't as competitively oriented, for example, as the United States. The United States is a very competitive environment, so there's more propensity of oversight. But anyway, the Romantics help teach the Naiji that seeing a vision for a better way for humans, that's the point of wisdom, and enacting a code of conduct that makes flags forward, wins happen for a heroic tribe, a heroic people, heroic relationships, honoring things, because the other Romantics also tend to be oriented in a spirituality that has a kind of personified nature that the Naiji also shares. They may personify in different ways and different things, but it helps teach the Naiji that I'm a deeply spiritual person that needs to personify my spirituality. All mojos can be deeply spiritual, but the Naiji, I need to enact my spirituality in the way my momentum powers come on. If I don't recognize why I'm doing what I'm doing, all my work will be off, all my equations will be off, all my efforts will be for naught. For example, Naiji can have a special relationship with the Jaini, as they are both kind of a subdivision of the Romantics called the Subrahms. And this can help teach the Naiji about their sensitive nature, because the Jaini are also extremely sensitive. And so studying about their sensitivities allows the Naiji sensitivities to become an acceptable talking point, because it's honorable to treat that other creature in such a way, and so thus it is honorable to treat yourself in that way. The Naiji, through the three other Romantics, can learn how to turn the romantic momentum, because they're part of an overall romantic storyline, so there's natural roles they fill when they're with the Jinai, when they're with the Nijai, when they're with the Jaini, when they're with all four, three, whatever. And so it helps teach you your story, because you were built, if there is actually four Romantics doing something, you're supposed to be doing a fourth of that and a specific fourth of that. And that helps teach you about yourself. One thing's lucky about being one of the Romantics is that Romantics are very heavily represented in pop culture. Actually, so are the Nez Alpha. When it comes to like relationship kind of stories and movies and music, the Romantics are very heavily represented. And then movies, comedy, all kinds of things like that, the Nez Alpha are heavily represented. And actually, you see them in everything. You see a lot of Nezes, for example, in dramas, and you see all over. Point is, the Nez Alpha and the Romantics make up the vast majority of people in movies and music that you may be aware of. So there's a lot for you to study as an IG, and I recommend studying the humor and studying the nuance of relationships. There's a lot of movies and things and lyrics and songs of Romantics talking about the ins and outs of relationships, how Nai works, how Ni works, how Jai works, how Ji works, all the sophistication, and in a poetic medium that moves you so you get it, because you really can't understand romantic concepts without being moved. You really can't understand humor without being made to laugh and being able to cause others to laugh. If you don't know how to laugh, truly laugh, and you don't know how to get others to laugh, truly laugh, then you really don't understand humor, no matter how many books you write about it. Next, First Wave, which actually has the same mojos as it is Alpha. But the thing to focus on here, for example, instead of the humor, because the humor kind of emphasizes the Nez channel aspect. But there's also the issue with how that relates to the literal powers and change flow. This is very important because being First Wave, we're the furthest away from plugging in our powers into a sort of real-world payout. So by studying all the Nez Alpha, basically, the First Wavers, the same mojos, besides studying how their wit works and what wit can do, you can study how do different Naiji set themselves up to be successful in life while keeping good self-identity, good metaphysical health. How are they able to be successful in the world? Study that. Study Nai and how they do that. Study Nijai and how they do that. Study Nizai. because all four of the first waivers, they actually must deal with going from a world of ideas and then taking that and having to go down the furthest to a literal power as their polar power, as their major modulation, in order to get a concrete payout. So that's an overall game, for example, that companies are involved in. Taking ideas, prototypes, working out a first wave, and then improving things and mass marketing. So studying the way that works in general will help you individuals at NIG set yourself up in order to take your high SS index powers and get them to give you a real world payout. But that is part of a way of moving from first wave to fourth wave. And you are first wave, so it's very, very important you understand how that works. Subjective interpretatives include NIG, NIZ, Zhiny, and also the Ziny. This is another one of the near groups for the NIG to be into. These four mojos are kind of otherworldly. I often kind of get the idea of, like, druids or other kind of otherworldly orders that you see in cultures from all over the world, where there is a need to keep separate from the normal goings-on in order to create something special. For example, in shamanic tradition, usually things are broken down in two major areas, which is being a seer and being a healer. And all the hunters you could sort of see as seers, and all the towers you could see as healers. But the hunters that are interpretive and the towers that are interpretive, they have what you would kind of see as more like almost like traditional shamanic vibe going on, because the seeing and healing they do is of patterns that others cannot see as well. Because the world's not set up to be conducive to these as it should be, this is why these subjective interpretives are the mojos, the four mojos that get misread as being super rare the most. In most of the different, say, typology models that attempt to read the phenomenon of mojo, when they misread, as they inevitably do, usually they have the subjective interpretives, all four of them, as being somewhere around 1 to 2%, and they have objective interpretives and subjective literals as being about 5 to 6% each. And then objective literals are apparently the most prevalent human in the world, and they're around 12 to 13% each. Okay, that's all bullshit. And it's important to actually get in touch with that, because the world will make it difficult to find that signal. Hanging out other subjective interpretives connects an IG with the otherworldly nature of how you work, and how by taking special time, making a special space to allow your kind of uniquely sensitive instrument to do what it does, you get awesome otherworldly powers, which is very, very cool. But it's not easy, and that's why they get misread, because the subjective interpreters are not rarer than other mojos, but they are consistently, at least in the US, the mojos that are the least preferred to be. People misread as not being that more than other mojos. And it's because being a subjective interpretive, you do need a lot of kind of like a role-playing game. Generally, wizards and priests, they have, and priestesses, they have higher requirements to make what they do go. Spell requirements. To make their spells happen, they have to do certain things. If they don't do these things, their powers don't work. So it's kind of, it's more of an ordeal than it is for other mojos to get our basic powers to go. But when they do, we can do spells, which the other characters can't do, which is really, really awesome. Now we continue on to a little further away. We have the Nai-Eyes, the Nai mojos, which includes ourselves, the Nai-Z, the Zhiny already, but also the Zhiny. And here, it's a continuation of what we learned with the Nai-Z when we were in the Nai Alpha, which is what is Nai. We're now seeing what Nai looks like as a primary perception. And in order to understand that, you have to bring in the Zhiny, which can greatly help a Nai get in touch with the directiveness of Nai. Nai is the yinnest of the directive powers, and Nai-Ji are the yinnest of the directive mojos. So when the Nai-Ji actually encounters the Ji-Nai and the Nai-Z earlier on, they help the Nai-Ji get more comfortable with their directive nature, because being objective is more overtly directive, and being, Z mojo is more overtly directive. So combining those two, an objective Z mojo that uses Nai, you really see how Nai can be used in a consistently, overtly, directive way. Not that Z-Nai can't be extremely subtle and hide their games, they can. It's not that. But they use the bracing backed by the cunning as a primary life tool, and they're very successful at it. So it can help teach an IG, wow, Nai is very impactful. I mean, you are aware this is an IG too, but it's a bit more reluctant going from the subjective to the objective, and it's more reluctant to kind of pull the trigger because of flex factor. So Nai-Z and Ji-Nai help teach the Nai-Ji what it is they do and when to pull the trigger, and a Z-Nai helps stretch that out to an even greater degree. Also, if you imagine going to present your Nai ideas to a Nai-Z or a Ji-Nai, you can see how you're going to have to adjust, you're going to have to grow, groom, sculpt your ideas in such a way that it makes more sense and impact to a Nai-Z or a Ji-Nai. A Z-Nai is still a Nai mojo, so you should be able to make that Nai contact if your idea is strong, if you can actually get it to go down your peak pathway far enough, strong enough. Because they are a Nai mojo, you just need to be able to figure out how to get them to see it with their Nai, they do have Nai, and to appreciate it with their Z. That'll be challenging, but it can be done, and so it's a very good workout for a Nai-Ji to do to develop themselves. Next, you have the Ji mojos, who have the Ji face. Here, this is a continuation of the Nai-Ji with the Ji-Nai, learning that although they are very unusual Ji mojo, they are a Ji mojo. So here, we're going to see the other two Ji mojos, the Vi-Ji and the Ji-Vi. And by seeing these mojos, it teaches you how Ji works, because although Nai-Ji, for example, may use their Ji to understand, the workings of aquatic life, or to understand the workings of the planets and how they act as a sort of, stellar nursery, things like this. That can seem very different, and the way it is, but it still operates based on the way of Ji, which has code of conduct, which has impassionment, which has flex factor. And so, even if you're an IG who is using in a heroic way your powers to understand the cosmos in a very cosmological way, it's important to know that you discern primarily with Ji, which includes code of conduct, impassionment, flex factor, etc. Because otherwise, the fact that it's having an application that is seen by the world as being rather Zez, it can confuse you that you should operate like a Zez mojo, but you're not. You're a Zez mojo, you're a Ji mojo. So the way that a Ji-Vi gets happy or upset about something, it teaches you how Ji works, and you can apply that to the things that your Ji is particularly associated or attached to. But sometimes seeing a Ji and a Ji-Vi or Vi-Ji, the fact that they don't have the perception preference that you do, it helps you get a more direct read on what Ji is for a Ji mojo, how that code of conduct works, how it powers everything you do. You can take that and then apply it to your Nai-Ji Ji game. Move a bit faster now, running out of time on my tape. But then we have the last of the quartets, Shades of Me, which for us is Nai, Ji, Zai, and V. These four mojos share a zest for epic adventure. I guess all mojos do, but these mojos in a kind of like traditional epic heroic story and the action adventure sequences that go with it. So action adventure, all four of those mojos kind of share that. So Ni with G is what does an epic hero do? What makes an epic hero? What events comprise an epic hero's life? And then how does that work? Like, not just in my mind's eye, like I want to go out my backyard and try that shit out, like, you know, Ninja Warrior style. Okay, that'd be really cool to be like a ninja on top of a mountain, hanging out with his friends in a barbecue. That'd be awesome. Okay, how to do that? We need this and this, and so all those mojos actually share that. There's also just sort of like a general love for playful mayhem. You'll see this in like Mythbusters. There's Naiji, the guy Adam Savage, and Zybe, Jamie Hyneman, and then Tori Belleci is Jinai. So right there you see that kind of motif in action. It's just kind of fun to just do crazy stuff and see what happens. It's sometimes, a lot of times, social alchemy, it's hard to put to words. It's better to even just see it, and that's like that magic unfolding. In American Chopper, both the businesses, the father and the sons, they have Naiji, Jinai, and Zybe. Actually, it's heavy on the Naiji and Zybe, but there's also Jinai. So again, you see a bit of that Shades of Me dynamic, just you know, a delight in heroic, visceral adventures. Now for the octets, you have being directive. That's the first one for an IG. And this is really important because as an IG, we're the yinnest of the directive mojos. So it can be helpful to see the way of directiveness. And for that, we had to see all the directives, including Ziva, whose way of being directive seemed probably the most foreign to us. But by seeing all 8 of the directive mojos doing what they do and having it make sense, it creates a way. And there's a way to it. There's a way that directiveness gets done. And by understanding all of how directiveness works as a phenomenon of natural law, then your particular facet of that phenomenon, the Naiji aspect of directiveness, will make more sense and you'll be wiser as a Naiji because you understand directiveness. Then being subjective, Naiji often can feel bad about their HSP, which is a very extreme kind of sensation, and being subjective is a part of that. But there are gifts that come from that kind of sensitivity. Subjectives experience that sensitivity. There are other sensitivities that lead to HSP, such as being interpretive and values-based and a few other things. But the subjective aspect is one that one can feel bad about, like they have to explain to other people, or they don't want to explain to other people. Either way, it's a bit of an uncomfortable topic. That's an uncomfortable thing to be speaking about. But it's not, it's just a part of natural law. It's beautiful. Humans are the most advanced thing that natural law has created that we know of. And the subjective-objective binary flow is part of that. That's supposed to be there. Subjectivity, the way of subjectivity, is crucial to the natural law of humans, which means we can embrace the beauty and power of that in ourselves as Naiji are subjective. Interpretives. This gets us in touch with interpretiveness. We got a large dose of this when we were studying the Nez Alpha. But now, in order to understand interpretiveness in a greater context, we would need to study all the interpretives. And we mentioned the wit and humor aspect of Nez. But there's also, overarching even that, a general advantageous use of hit or miss perception. That's important to note. The hit or miss quality can be perceived as a negative. It's important to understand it's not, it's an advantage. It's balanced out, it's a checks and balance that the literal powers are superior when it comes to actually being consistent on applied use of something and having a return on that use match what you put into it. So that's not the Nez strong suit. None of the interpretive mojos, that's not their main advantage. Their main advantage is using the hit or miss. They're able to see things before others are able to, or that others are not able to see at all. the thing that goes along with that is there's a lot of feeling out in the dark, or like a bloodhound trying to find that scent. So that means that you won't always hit something on your first try with being interpretive. But that's not how that process works. You're feeling out into the unknown, into possibility to see what's there. So the advantage is that you can do that at all. And you shouldn't focus on the fact that it's hit or miss. The hit or miss is simply the way it works. That's the way interpretive pattern recognition works. And to see it play out in 8 mojos that are awesome, that are powerful, and that natural law clearly created to operate that way, there's a way to being interpretive, to being a pattern reader. And you must learn to love the way of pattern reading in order to be an excellent pattern reader. Values-based. This continues on from things learned from the Nijai, how you need to pay attention to her Jai and its needs, and the Jinai, how it kind of stimulates your code of conduct and says, hey, shouldn't we do something about that? And you're like, yeah, you know what, we should do something about that. That's fucked up. Let's do something, man. So that's good, but to understand it fully, you'd actually need to understand the way of being values-based, the way the values-based channel works, to see all the values-based mojos doing what they do, because to understand those humanistic kind of concepts of like honor and virtue, you need to see it played out. You need to see it played out in all 16 mojos. But as the next large chunk of understanding, you would need to see it in all 8 of the values mojos. Because then when you understand, you know, how those things like code of conduct and virtue work for the values-based mojos, your role as a particular flavor, as a dissatisfied, caring, values-based mojo, it makes more sense, you are more masterful, you are more heroic. Real fast now, I'm running out of time. Perception lead, we are perception lead, and that's very important to note because perception lead works differently than discernment lead. For example, there's some confusion like in the MBTI model where they kind of combine in their J and P, they combine the concept of directive and adaptive with the concept of perception lead and discernment lead. Naiji are a classic case of why that's not true, because we are perception lead. We lead with gaining information, not making decisions, but we're directive. So we're definitely directive and we're definitely perception lead. So being understanding the 8 mojos that are directive and understanding the 8 mojos that are perception lead, of which we're in both groups, that gives us more layered understanding of ourselves. Because often Naiji can over-identify necessarily with being perception lead, I like to just get more and more information, and they think that means they're adaptive. They're not. Or they're like, I like closure. That means I'm discernment lead. No, that means you're directive. Naiji are perception lead and directive, which are 2 different things of which we are both. Then we have the modulation octates. First for us would be the G with the Xi. Not Ni with V as far as difficulty, because that's even more different from us. It's easier to understand as G mojos, since G's are tandem. It's easier to understand the Xi mojos as another modulator. Here we learn really how you cannot have good G without good Xi. One works with the other, because when you see the Xi mojos, you're like, their Xi wouldn't make sense to me, and I couldn't really connect with them if it didn't have the G. And that's how it works. It being the modulation of G with Xi. And that means automatically that applies to you. You would need to have a very good G to Xi connection in order to be a honorable, heroic member of this group. So when you show up as an IG, you want to be a hero. So you show up to the group that is the G-Xi modulators. You want every single one in there, the G mojos and the Xi mojos that comprise this group, to actually think well of you, to think you do G with Xi well. And to get that understanding and approval and interaction with all of those modulators. Then you know you really have started to get a handle on it. Ni with V, this is the same thing, but more so because our perception is our first for us, so we most identify with being Ni, with being interpretive. So V mojos can seem the most foreign. But they teach us what makes Ni so beautiful is that it does connect with V that seems so different. So when you see the connection of Ni to V at all, it's an amazing form of synonymia. And in order to achieve that really high level synonymia yourself, you would need to see how that works. The synonymia, synesthesia, particularly in this case, of Ni with V. How does that work? And to know that, you'd have to see all 8 of the mojos that use that. Finally, you are an IG and you are an amazing hero, but the key to that is that you are part of a heroic species, the tribe of humanity. You are a superhero from a tribe of superheroes. So just like all the other maths teach you that those are simply phenomenon, and it is true because it is. And then I relate to this truth. That means it is above and before me, and thus it's something I can have true faith in. That is looking at the human species as being magnificent, because only if they are magnificent am I magnificent. 2 are 1.